You're about to enter a new dimension where boundaries of life sciences, data, and technology blur, and AI reshapes what's possible. Welcome to the Improzo, powered by Improzo.
Welcome back. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So excited to have you all here. We are in episode 2 of 4 in our mini series around using AI and adapting it and thinking about it in a secure way. And so I have Nathan Trueblood here with me to talk about step 2. And step 2 here, we just talked about baby steps. So step 1 is really about getting started with AI. And so if you haven't done that yet, go back and listen to 1. But step 2 here is now we're talking about actually building tools and engaging with AI as a tool itself, as opposed to just turning it on. And then we'll get into buying and using tools that other folks have created with AI, and then finally talk about external facing AI tools in episode 4. So to get us into this maybe walking stage here, this building using AI internally to build tools for yourselves. Nathan, talk to me about what changes when a pharma company goes from just using ChatGPT or whatever it is to actually building something with an AI solution.
Yeah, great question. And I want to comment for a moment about sort of the bigger picture of this series here, which is we're really kind of talking about a maturity curve that I see across a lot of enterprises. And if you look even sort of, I don't know how you'd think about it. I'm a techie, so I think of it as an architecture. But if you look at the sort of map of the whole organization, a large pharma company, for example, their AI is popping up everywhere. Right. And so in episode 1, we talked a little bit about like, okay, it's just popping up, on the desktop of every employee. Like
Right.
maybe they have access to Chat GPT. So that's one way it's popping up. And the next way it's starting to pop up is companies are realizing, wait a second, not only can we make our employees potentially more productive by giving them, direct access to something like ChatGPT, we can actually start to do things like build workflows that are AI powered. We could introduce conversational AI that's focused on specific problems that could be used to automate. So, these are, and now it's starting to get really powerful because you could have an agent that's connected to your internal data that can go off and do something. AI can be working while everyone is sleeping. We hear this in the market right now. There's quite a lot of excitement about agentic AI. Um,
Yes.
it's
Yes. Can,
really
can
powerful.
can I interrupt you just to ask a
Yeah.
very, very basic question? When you say agent or you talk about agentic, what does that mean? What is an agent?
Great question. And it's funny because, of course, there's marketing hype and marketing buzzwords, and then what is it actually? And it's kind of funny because I think agentic AI as a term is starting to blur to cover a lot of things.
Yeah.
I think when people talk about it in more of a strict sense, what they mean is uh, an application, a process that has access to a model. That application has some rules, has some things it can do. It has tools that it has available to it. So in some ways, it's kind of like an employee, but it can do some reasoning. You can ask it to do something, and then within the realm of what it's allowed or defined to do, it can then go use those tools. So it could be something as simple as, please go do some research for me and bring back and summarize the results. That's more of a summary example of an agent. Where the lines get blurry right now is there's agentic AI, and then people say, well, okay, but it's just a chatbot. Maybe it's just something a human is interacting with. Where I think it gets blurry is when you say, well, when you ask the chatbot to go do something on your behalf and come back later and tell me about it, when the chatbot starts to act more autonomously. But I would say the lines are getting blurry. But I think of an agent as uh, an AI that has access to tools, that has a particular mission, where it can go and do something for you on its own. Whereas conversational AI is really much more interactive. But in both cases, we see enterprises starting to really embrace this because
Yeah.
uh, you might be nervous about exposing AI capabilities, chatbots and things like that to your customers. That's a little more scary from a reputation perspective. But I see the enthusiasm around agentic AI is we can power some really tremendous workflows with all of this.
That makes sense. And I think, the build could be as simple as, go look for a specific thing and tell me about it, which that sounds simple, but honestly, there's a lot of applications for that, right? Because maybe there's a news item you want to know about, like if a competitor's doing something, or certainly in the case of pharma, whatever the FDA is deciding to do in a given moment in time, like knowing what policy changes are happening.
And the
I think
FDA is a
that's
great
yeah,
example. Like, you could have an agent whose job it is to go out and crawl, the FDA websites and tell us about when something has changed and bring me back that information when you see something, right?
yeah.
That's very
So now it's
powerful.
off your plate. Like you don't
Right.
have to think about it
Right.
anymore.
All IT transformation is about making people more productive, giving us leverage, right? But now let's talk a little bit about the risks. Well,
Yeah.
using that FDA example, well, what if the agent comes back and tells you something has changed, but you haven't done anything to validate that? What if it's wrong? That's a really
Yeah.
big
And I
concern.
think that's maybe what do you underestimate? Because now it seems like kind of magical and amazing, and you've saved all this time, and now I don't have to worry about this anymore. Is that really true? Or is there still some things that maybe you're overestimating or underestimating, depending how you look at it?
That's right. That's right. But I think where the risks come in when you're starting to build with AI, especially connecting it to your internal data sources, is how will you understand and govern what agents or conversational AI internally, um, how do you protect against it revealing information it's not supposed to? So, for example, maybe you want to start to build something, give agents or conversational AI access to a bunch of your data sources, whatever those might be. Now, that can be powerful, but if an employee, let's use an HR example, like maybe you've given access to a lot of your employee data, and that may be very powerful, but it also introduces a new kind of risk, which is, well, what if this conversational AI could tell me about Jane's salary? It might
Yeah.
have access to Jane's salary, incredibly powerful capabilities there, but you don't want it revealing information it's not supposed to. One of the things I keep hearing over and over about that is, and it's early days, is people don't know what the risks are. They will say things like, well, but our data has permissions. So Jane's not allowed to see that. So permissions will save us. And that's kind of the old thinking, but it's like, but you've just given this agent access to all the data. It has access to everything. And so, how are you going to govern that? And so, oftentimes, it again comes down to having guardrails and monitoring to say, hey, if the agent goes and finds this data, there should be some rules around, hey, you can't share certain kinds of information. Again, sort of guardrails are there to make sure that the agent is staying within its mission and can't be tricked.
Yeah, and I think
But
that's
yeah,
the thing. It's supposed to do one thing, but you can underestimate how you could trick it. I think we were talking about this in the past, this idea of prompts that will kind of unlock features or information that was certainly not the intention of the original design of the agent. And that I think is a new sort of, I guess it's a new frontier, frankly, for
it's a big
security.
frontier. That's
Yeah.
right. And so a couple of notable examples there. One that comes to mind that was sort of in the public was, an agent, so an autonomous AI-powered thing that has access to your email. And there was I can't remember who it was, maybe it was Gemini. Someone just simply sent a calendar invite that had a prompt injection, which then tricked the agent that read that calendar invite into dumping that user's contacts back out. Now, um, they didn't even accept the calendar invite. It was just when the agent processed the data in that calendar invite, there was some hidden prompting in there, and it, then caused the agent to access tools and do things it wasn't supposed to. Like, so that's an example of the kind of risk. We just recently saw this with Microsoft, and they have an MCP server for Excel. And MCP is a protocol for agent to agent communication, right? And
Yeah.
they so
Kind of
an
like an
example,
API framework for AI,
it's
right?
how it's
Kind
how
of,
agents can talk to each other.
yeah.
So essentially, you could go through their gateway and say, "Hey, can you go have this agent go and look up this spreadsheet? And please, I'll use the salary example. Please tell me, how much this employee is making. Go look it up in the spreadsheet." But that spreadsheet had a hidden prompt injection, and so when the salary came back, it actually came back triple the value that was actually in the spreadsheet. simply
Whoa.
because someone had injected a hidden prompt into the spreadsheet. So the agent was just dutifully doing what it's supposed to do, but there was no guardrail there. So in that case, we introduced a secure MCP gateway that's looking at that interaction between these two different agents and saying, hey, wait a second, there was a security problem here and the agent got the answer wrong. So it's powerful because now
Which
we're
is separate from
connecting.
even just answering the question, right? So to your point, like there's the risk of it answering the question when it shouldn't be able to answer that question. Like it shouldn't have access to that data. But then the added bonus is it could also be inaccurate data that
It
it
could be
got.
manipulated to
Yeah.
provide
Right.
inaccurate data.
Purposefully inaccurate data,
And
which is
look, that would require a malicious internal actor, but it could also mean someone just simply uploads a file from outside. I'm going to process this file and hand it to an agent. So it's
yeah.
tremendous power because now you're starting to give AI more context in the form of your data, in the form of your workflows. Um, but every time you have more power, you need to make sure you have appropriate governance in place so that you can see, oh, wait a second, this agent is straying off of its mission, or this is an inaccurate response, or someone's actually trying to somehow cause intentional misbehavior.
Yeah,
So
I
these
think
are all
we're like the
different
idea of
categories of risk.
purposeful, yeah, and the idea of purposeful prompt hacking, if you will, is super on the edge for a lot of people right now. I don't think that's been talked about enough, and it's so important to be thinking about it. So I guess if you're going to try to build something and you're a pharma company and you're in this stage two, if you will, that we kind of made up these stages, but let's go with it.
Yeah.
What would be the steps that folks should be thinking to take as they get into trying to build agents with AI?
So there's a couple ways I think about it. In a general sense, if you're going to build, say, a conversational experience, so it's something that can go and summarize data for you, or an agent that's going to go do something for you, you want to understand what the vulnerabilities are in that agent. How can it be tricked or manipulated, right? And so uh, one of the steps there is just understanding where the risks are, and then starts to come in guardrails.
Mhm.
Guardrails are there to protect its behavior. But where it gets interesting is now we're talking about guardrails that aren't just generic, like don't show data you're not supposed to. Now it's very use case specific. When you are researching something, you need to go through some extra steps to make sure that it's accurate. We start to call this, or I call it use case specific policy and guardrails, because you might have, as a pharma company, a general principle around how AI can be used. You already have data privacy, you already have all these external regulations, but now we're talking about a specific workflow or a specific application. So you need to have application specific guardrails. And this doesn't have to be hard. It might sound difficult, but it's really not. It's really a matter of you need to have some basic rules of the road that govern how this application can behave. It's very similar to giving an employee a new tool. Hey, we're rolling this new thing out internally, and oh, by the way, here's some guidance about how this tool should and shouldn't be used. You
Right.
can give that to employees. If you're going to have agents, you need to put in guardrails that implement those same policies, but they're now policies for the artificial humans.
Well, I think, one of the metaphors I often have used in explaining like where and how to think about applying AI is that it's almost like a very eager, smart intern, right? Someone who's they know a lot and they're able to do work pretty quickly, but they may not have a lot of context or experience to guide them. And so you have to still, right, kind of check the work and make sure it makes sense and
That's a great
potentially go
metaphor,
back and
actually.
like, so if you think about you've just created a troop of interns now in your organization and one
And
of
they're
them is
brilliant
specifically,
and
yeah,
they're fast, right?
yep.
And you're giving them access to all your data, and you're like, wait, you were posting what on Reddit?
Yes,
You know,
exactly. I mean,
so
that's kind of what it is. So if you can think about that as your kind of, I guess, metaphor for what you want as it's like if you have an intern whose job it is to look up stuff at the FDA from our earlier idea,
right, right.
making sure they understand that not there's a certain part of the FDA website that's really where the final guidance goes and the other things are draft guidance and those are different and like how to treat them and like you have to get pretty specific, right? So that the context of this task is clearer because I do think that's part of the challenge right now is this like sort of over eagerness almost that AI tends to have. So that to me is maybe one of the ways to if you're going to go and do this, right? Imagine that you've got an intern in front of you and you're trying to give them feedback and guidance on what to do, what not to do. And that can help you maybe think about what what do I fill in that blank of a use case specific governance guardrail
I,
set,
I
right?
really like this metaphor. I think so. Thinking of an agent like an intern, so incredibly powerful, but it has a specific job to do. At the beginning, and I think what's powerful about agents is at the beginning you might sit the intern down and say, okay, here's what we want you to do. Here's what's allowed. Here's what's not allowed. Maybe read this, I don't know, employee handbook. But over time, they may forget about that. In the case of an agent, um, you can give them the policy if in the form of guardrails, and they're not going to stray from that policy, or at least you
Right.
can operationalize the control. So there's no possibility that they're going to have a slip up or forget one day that the rule was there. But this really introduces us an important cycle, which is you need to understand the basics of what you want to protect. Maybe you put in guardrails, and then you need to monitor the behavior, and then you're going to be tuning those over time. Just like a company might update its employee handbook, right, based on, well, some things happened last year, and now we need to update
Yeah.
the employee
We have a new
handbook.
scenario that we hadn't thought of,
We hadn't
and
thought of
so
before, and it's exactly the same for
yeah.
agentic AI and AI in general, which is uh, first do some assessment. Where do we think the risk is? Put in some appropriate guardrails, and then monitor the behavior, and then adjust as you go. But I think the
Yeah.
power here is once you get those guardrails right, you can go fast without worrying that unlike humans, that it's going to suddenly decide to do something else.
Yeah, I think that's an important insight. So to wrap us up, 'cause we're trying to keep these bite size, if you
Yeah.
will, going from just using to building is, I think, really cool transition. And it is something we want to see people like making that, I think, growth and maturity. But you do have another layer of safety to think about because it's no longer as human involved. And so you have to really think about AI as sort of this intern employee that is going to need a fair amount of training and oversight. But then once you give that training and oversight, now you've really unlocked something pretty amazing because they won't forget and they won't get
Yeah.
lazy or tired the way that maybe your human intern could. So it's a really cool opportunity to go into this realm of building and doing more with AI. So thanks again for your time, Nathan, and for talking about this today. It was great.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's exciting to see how things are shaping up. And maybe I'll leave one last final thought, which is some enterprises are trying to approach this sort of in a boil the ocean kind of way. And meaning like, let's try to anticipate every risk here before we take a single step forward. What I think has been true time and time again is start with a specific application or workflow. If for that workflow, evaluate the models or technologies that fit that situation, and then figure out what are the appropriate rules of the road, what are the appropriate guardrails for that application. And the reason I say start small is once you start to understand how to make this work for one application, then you can generalize to the whole organization. But I
Yeah.
think some large companies tend to want to sort of, well, let's anticipate every possibility first. But what we're seeing is, yes, look at the big picture, but then start somewhere so that you can learn. And that's really going to inform your approach overall.
That's great advice. And I think the other thing is that you may find patterns that then you can generalize. So it's actually kind of going both
You're
ways. You
looking
may
for patterns. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's right.
that pattern recognition of like this is a problem that's not unique to this particular use case. I'm going to want to take this and share it, with everybody else. So I think that's part of the journey that this build stage is on. So thank you again for stepping into the Impro Zone, and I hope you
Pleasure.
enjoyed our mini series on AI and security.
Thanks, Jane.
Thanks.
This has been the Improzo, improving life, empowering customers. Follow us and stay tuned for what's next.